morning, good afternoon, everybody. We've got an audience joining us from around the world. My name is Jesse, and I am your virtual adventure guide here with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time today, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world through like a gazillion live free interactive broadcasts. We do 40 programs every single month. Today really epitomizes that. We started off live in the Falkland Islands. We just wrapped up with Dr. Mortimer talking about spiders and elephants. Later today, we've got two NASA engineers, but I must confess secretly that today's program, this program, is my favorite one. It's one that has been 2 years in the making, and we are joined live by Leo Richards. So he is a nature enthusiast, someone who has spent his life falling in love with the natural world and finding every way that he could of sharing that passion with the public. His YouTube channel and website, Natural World Facts, have over 580,000 subscribers that tune in every single week to learn about amazing creatures all around the planet, and specifically in the deep sea. The abyss, or deep sea, is the largest ecosystem on this planet, filled with some of the most unique and incredible creatures that the world has to offer. And so today, we are going to dive in with Leo to learn a little bit more about this incredible place, some of the things that live within it, and dive in with more. We are going to have a Kahoot quiz today as well, so just a quick note for our live classes and our YouTube groups. If you want to join in, our game pin is on the screen. I'll make sure you have that before we go live with that as well. But for now, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Leo to blow our minds over the next 20 minutes. Leo, thank you so much for joining us today live in the UK, man.
Hello, thank you so much, Jesse. Very excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I know you've got a lot to share with us, some really cool stuff. I got a little sneak peek before we get underway. So if you want to dive in and share your screen, we are good to go.
I think that should be working. How's that looking?
That is looking spectacular. You're good.
Perfect. Hello, I'm Leo. I'm a bit obsessed with the deep sea, and hopefully in the next 20 minutes, I can convince you why you should be as well. But before that, let's think about the ocean as a whole. So, here it is, a sprawling expanse of seemingly endless blue waves that disappear away into the horizon. This vast blue covers more than 70% of our planet, and despite this, there's not a lot to see from up here. There's no mountain ranges or valleys, no great green forests or deserts, just blue. But hidden away beneath the surface, we find an entirely new world. Down here, things are not at all uniform. Vibrant coral reefs support more animal life than any other ecosystem on the planet, serving as breeding grounds for fish and feeding grounds for predators. Kelp forests conceal an altogether different community of life, from spiny urchins to sea otters. And at the seagrass meadows, manatees graze on the nutrient-rich greenery of these sunlit waters. So, coral reefs, kelp forests, and seagrass meadows. There's something that these three ecosystems have in common, and is the reason why they're bursting with so much life. Can you think among yourselves what this uniting factor might be, why these three ecosystems are so biodiverse? Well, it's sunlight. All these environments exist in the ocean's uppermost layer, called the Sunlight Zone, or the epipelagic. It makes up the top 200 meters of the ocean, and here in the shallows, the process photosynthesis is made possible by the presence of sunlight, allowing algae like kelp, plants like the seagrass, or microscopic plant-like organisms called phytoplankton to harness the sun's energy to produce nutrients that, in turn, supports entire complex food webs of animals that feed on them. But what about the places where there is no sunlight? In the dark depths that lurk below? Well, let's start to descend and find out. Below a depth of 200 meters, the sunlight fades to a gloomy haze. This zone of the ocean is called the Twilight Zone, or the mesopelagic, and plants can't survive down here. It's just too dark. There's not enough light to support photosynthesis. For a long time, scientists believed that life was not possible down here. It was thought that nothing at all could survive in a place with no sunlight where no nutrients are being produced. But in the last century, deep-sea exploration began to reveal that this is not the case at all, and there is indeed life down here. Fascinating, unfamiliar life. A whole host of unusual animals have found clever ways to survive, adapting their physiology, their behaviors, and their shape or morphology to become better suited to living down here. This compilation of clips from Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute highlights just a few examples of what's down here. This is a vampire squid, an inhabitant of the Twilight Zone that has evolved a number of unusual characteristics to make the most of life in the gloom. It has large, sensitive eyes to be able to see in the low light. Its dark red-coloured body allows it to blend in and hide away in plain sight, since red light is filtered out in shallower waters. And dangling from below its cape-like arms is a long filamentous tentacle that it uses to catch food. But despite its name, the vampire squid is not a bloodsucker. It feeds instead on something called marine snow, a continuous shower of tiny particles of dead animals, poo, and other organic material that sinks from the sunlit surface waters, where the high abundance of animals produces enormous amounts of waste material. In fact, marine snow is the main food source for most animals of the deep sea. On the sea floor, peculiar communities of giant sponges and bottom-dwelling crabs all rely on this material for food. You can see here just how thick that snowfall really is. The crabs in this clip are king crabs, and in addition to eating the marine snow, they are fierce predators, eating almost anything they're able to crush in their claws. As we journey deeper, we enter the next layer of the deep sea, the bathypelagic or the midnight zone, where the conditions for life are even harsher. Pressure is immense. There is no light whatsoever, no residual gloom like we found in the Twilight Zone, and temperatures are as low as 4 degrees Celsius or 39 Fahrenheit. And crucially, food here is even scarcer. Most of the marine snow from the ocean surface waters has been eaten by animals in the Twilight Zone, leaving very little for the inhabitants of the bathypelagic. But once again, life has found a way to overcome this challenge, and in rather an unexpected way. This, cruising into view, is one of the largest sharks on Earth. It is completely blind, incredibly slow-moving, and has only been captured on video a handful of times. It's called the Greenland shark, and it's my favourite animal. It demonstrates a fascinating phenomenon called deep-sea gigantism, which is an observation that deep-sea animals tend to grow to enormous sizes compared to their relatives in the shallows. By becoming larger, animals can dramatically slow their metabolic rates and survive by eating very little food. In the case of Greenland sharks, this has also enabled them to extend their lifespans dramatically. It's thought that they can live for over 500 years, meaning there are sharks alive today that were swimming in the seas 250 years before the United States was even founded. That's insane. And their close relatives, Pacific sleeper sharks, have been filmed feeding on dead whales which have sunk to the sea floor. As you can see in this footage from 1998, they gorge themselves, feasting on the blubber, which can sustain them for a year or more without needing to eat again. But they're not the only giants of the deep sea. Take a look at this. This footage was taken from an underwater oil drilling site 1.5 miles or 2.5 kilometers down. After it's played, I'm going to ask if anybody can tell me what they think it might be.
So, folks who are tuning in, if you're on YouTube or on StreamYard with us, if you'd like to chime in the chat and say what you think this creature is, it's pretty wild. Feel free. Mr. Shaddix class, I can come to you guys if you have a thought of what that might be. What do we think?
I think it might be a type of squid.
Type of squid? Leo, is that you're nodding your head, so I think we nailed it on the first try.
Yes, it is a giant. It's an enormous squid species called the bigfin squid or the magnapina, and it is both creepy and fascinating. Those long draping tentacles underneath probe into deeper waters where they catch small prey like plankton. Well, the bulk of this squid's body remains hidden away in the dark above. It is perfectly adapted to this feeding mechanism. Personally, these squid always remind me of marionette puppets with those strange elbow-like bends on each of their arms. To show off some more examples of gigantism, here's some comparisons. This is a woodlouse, or pillbug, the kind of isopod you might find in your garden, scurrying around and cleaning up dead leaves under logs and stones. They grow to be around 11 millimeters long, or 0.43 inches. And this, nearing the size of a cat, is the giant isopod, a deep-sea scavenger that does almost exactly the same job, but 2,500 meters or 8,200 feet deep in the ocean, tidying up dead whales rather than leaves. It can grow to 40 centimeters or 16 inches, which is 36 times larger than woodlice. Thanks to its large size, if it needs to, it can go for 5 years or more without eating a thing. In this video, you can see their size relative to a crocodile carcass that was deliberately sunk to the deep sea floor to see if these seafloor scavengers were able to manage such a tough meal. Indeed, they were, and in a moment you'll see all that remained a month and a half later. Just the bones are left, so even a reptile with tough, scaly skin that is found in an entirely different ecosystem is able to be consumed with ease by these creatures. It just goes to show how good they are at their job. Recyclers, a cleanup crew at the bottom of the ocean. This is a sand flea, a tiny amphipod commonly found along beaches under piles of rotting seaweed. And guess what? In the deep sea, they're huge. This one is the supergiant amphipod, and once again, it's a scavenger, doing the incredibly important job of cleaning up debris and recycling nutrients for other animals in the ecosystem to use. Speaking of ecosystems, the deep sea floor has many, and all of them are remarkably strange and completely different from one another. This time-lapse shows the abyssal plain, a great flat mud-covered expanse that covers more than 50% of the planet and is home to burrowing organisms, sea cucumbers, and all sorts of peculiar bottom-dwelling animals. This is also where the giant isopods and amphipods that we just looked at tend to live. But then we have seamounts, chains of underwater mountains rising out of the sea floor and covered with vibrant coral reef gardens even here in the dark depths of the ocean, far from the tropical reefs we're used to seeing. Yup, corals, cold water corals, and here they are encrusting the rock. And on the sea floor at mid-ocean ridges where tectonic plates are moving apart, great towering chimneys called hydrothermal vents pump out superheated water. This water is rich in chemicals and minerals that allows bacteria to actually produce nutrients and support primary production in a process very similar to photosynthesis. In turn, we get a load of curiosities living here. Giant tube worms, 3 meters or almost 10 feet long, with vibrant red plumes, gather in clusters around the vents, covered with tiny deep-sea barnacles. We also see yeti crabs that are covered with white hairy mats of bacteria coating their bodies, and they pick at this whenever they get hungry. They gather in enormous clusters around the hydrothermal vents. Another odd habitat in the deep sea appears as if it's made up of underwater lakes resting on the ocean floor. And indeed, these are lakes. They have a surface, and they do not mix with the seawater above. These are called brine pools, and they are full of super salty water that wells up from buried salt plates underneath the ocean floor. As the water is so salty, it is significantly denser than typical seawater, so it pools here in dips, holes, and divots on the bottom of the ocean. What's more, they are toxic to almost all animals. Anything that is unlucky enough to fall within a brine pool suffers a toxic shock, like this fish, and will likely not re-emerge. Their bodies can remain within the pools for thousands of years without decomposing, just like a pickle jar. Here's a giant isopod like the ones we looked at earlier, preserved in the brine. Crabs too, which like to hunt mussels along the edge of the pools, often fall in, and they become covered with dull grey crystals that form from the mineral-rich brine. These ecosystem examples here are just the tip of the iceberg. The deep sea is now considered the largest living space on Earth, and it may host more biodiversity than anywhere else on the planet. But it's an incredibly difficult place to explore. Most of the pictures and videos I've shown today were recorded by robots called ROVs, or remotely operated vehicles, that are tethered to research ships by long data cables, allowing them to be controlled by pilots on the surface. And unlike exploring space, we can't just point a telescope down at the sea floor and observe what's down there. To discover the depths, we have to go there, either in submarines or via robots. And even then, as you can see here, you might only be able to see a few meters into the distance due to the thick gloom of the murky depths. The blue veil of the ocean surface conceals many wonders from view. And what's truly exciting is the thought that we've only scratched the surface when it comes to discovering what lurks down there. It's the last frontier of true exploration on planet Earth. In my opinion, at least, who'd want to be an astronaut when you could be a deep sea explorer and help discover and protect the incredible, unique, and fragile worlds that are hidden away beneath the high seas? That's all.
Leo, that was spectacular, man. Honestly, every time I go to Natural World Facts, I learn something new. Leo's got some of the most incredible videos I've ever seen in terms of nature explanation. I really encourage you to check out his YouTube channel and site. But for now, we're going to dive in with our Kahoot first, and then you'll have the chance to ask him any questions you want to know about some of these incredible creatures that we had the chance to see today. For now, we're going to kick off beginning with our Kahoot. If you haven't joined us yet, our game pin is 9986028. Lots of you are already in, which is fantastic. And for those who are new to Kahoot, the faster you answer, the more points you get. Now, you don't win anything, but you do win Leo and I's everlasting respect for having paid special attention to his presentation. When there's 5 seconds to go, we'll give everyone hints with these questions, but let's dive in and kick it off, and then you guys can ponder those questions as well. Starting off with question number 1 in our Halloween theme background as we get ever closer to Monday. All right, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to pull off our game pin here, folks. Diving in. Marine snow this is a fundamental part of our broadcast. What do we think? Is it ice melting on the surface? Literal kind of snow? Eggs from coral reef spawning events? Or a shower of organic matter slowly sinking? We've got 10 seconds to go. Most of you have your answers in. That's great. Leo, is it snow?
Well, as a potential, think about what input you might have from the surface of the ocean.
And
yes,
they
there we go.
Overwhelmingly got this right. Way to go, guys. All right, we've got most of you got this on the dot. Silly Urchin, our deep sea guy, currently in the lead with 1,000 points. Literally, got it within a second. So way to go. Question number 2. The biggest predator of the deep ocean. We did not cover this, or maybe we did cover this. Is it Megalodon? It lives, clearly. Is it the sperm whale? Is it a giant squid? Or is it a giant isopod? The biggest predator of the deep ocean. What do we think about Megalodon, Leo?
I wish it's out there. I hope it's out there.
I know. 53 answers. The sperm whale. So our apex predator, the largest large animal hunting thing on this planet is a sperm whale. And the thing they eat is, Leo, tell us this.
Well, from analyzing their stomach contents, scientists think that they eat giant squid and sometimes even colossal squid, which are enormous and very rarely seen. So the fact that they sometimes rely solely on these squid as their main source of food is quite spectacular.
To my knowledge, I'm thinking about dinosaur times. I still think it's the largest animal eating another large animal possibly ever. It's close if there's competition, but it's incredible to think this is happening in the oceans beneath us today. Silly Urchin has our lead. Fast Octopus, to keep our aquatic theme going, is currently in second. Let's go to question number 3. Giant isopods are relatives of. We did say this. Are they closely related to centipedes, sow-bugs or woodlice, spiders, or nothing good?
As a little clue, they do have hundreds of names in different parts of the world, but if you're not too sure, just go with your best guess.
Yeah. There should be a picture of one here that doesn't want to load because something should go wrong in every video broadcast. That's okay. Most of you got this right. Way to go. Sow-bugs or woodlice or chuckle pigs or roly-polies, or I've heard them at least 4 different names growing up in Toronto. The silly urchin. Oh, we had a complete changeover. Aquatic snail takes our lead in our scoreboard, and leading into our final question. True or false? The deepest ocean, or the deep ocean, is the world's largest ecosystem. Is there more room there than any other kind of place on Earth? Jungles, deserts, mountains, what have you. Most of you have your answers in. This is our final question before you get to ask Leo your own questions. You said it at the end. This is in the talk. 3, 2, 1, and it is by a significant margin. There's more space down there than any other ecosystem by a great deal. Let's dive in with our leaderboard. Aquatic snail number 3. We've got fast octopus number 2. Did our leader for most of it come back to take the lead at the end? Genius Pigeon came in. Who
well
knew?
Done.
If you are any of these people, let us know who you are. We'd love to say hello in the chat. But thank you so much for taking part in that. And guys, let's dive in with questions. Mr. Shattuck's class, Chalk River, Ontario. If you guys want to kick us off with one, you are good to go. Hey, guys.
I was first place. Go me. I was.
Way to go!
When did you find out that there was animals in the Midnight Zone?
Ooh. Oh, did we lose Leo again? We lost Leo. He's not just blinking really long. We're going to get Leo back in a second. Q&A begins and we lose the person who's going to be doing the Q&A part. So again, I'll just note while we're waiting for Leo to come back in with a little... Oh, he's back. We've got him. I won't note anything. Leo, when did we find out there were animals?
Sorry about that.
That's okay. This is
What was the question?
Video. Mr. Shadow's class, do you guys want to come on in and say again?
When did you find that there was sea life in the Midnight Zone?
Yes, when did we discover this?
I'm not entirely sure specifically when, but I know that sometime around a century ago, there was a very prominent scientific theory called the abyssus theory, which proposed that due to the lack of sunlight down there, nothing could survive. And then it was the Challenger expedition on board the Challenger ship, where they did a trawl of the deep sea, that they first realized that there really is life down there, and not just life down there, incredible, strange, and unfamiliar life. So that was definitely one of the cruises that first kind of allowed scientists to understand the deep sea as a complex ecosystem full of life.
So I just checked it out. Challenger expedition is 1872 through 1876, the iconic moment in sort of original deep sea sort of study in biology. Very, very cool. Let's head to Miss K's class, 7/8, Miss Gomar's group. If you guys want to come on in, you're good to go. Hey, guys. Welcome in. Do we have any questions for Leo?
Hey, Brayden, look. I don't think they're a little shy.
That's okay. Sometimes they are shy. If you have any, I can come back. You can always take them in the chat as well. But let's head to St. Martin if you guys have one for us. Welcome in, guys.
Oh my God. Wait, what's the most popular eaten thing in the Midnight Zone?
Ooh, the most popular eaten thing.
Do you mean from other animals or from people? Because surprisingly, some organisms are.
Really? So I think we're going to stick with animals to start, but then tell us the people bit after that.
Okay. The most popular eaten thing. I have a definite answer for the Twilight Zone, which would be the lanternfish, which is one of the most abundant fish in the ocean, and it forms these enormous shoals, and it's fed upon by almost every marine predator. In the Midnight Zone, I'm not entirely sure, but no.
Well, I
Good
brought
question,
up fish for people to check that out. So, people, what do we eat from down there? What on earth is this?
Well, in some parts of the world, the giant isopod, or at least a slightly different species, but still very similar genetically, is eaten as a delicacy, quite interestingly. And I don't know how they get it. I think potentially it's a subspecies that's found in more shallow waters around Japan, where you get a lot of migration from the deep sea and a very interesting kind of seascape. But yeah, interestingly enough, people do eat those.
Yeah. Fantastic. I not for me. I don't know if you would ever have one, Leo. Would you, if someone offered you some giant isopod?
Oh,
No.
I'd be curious, but I'd feel bad.
I've been sharing so much about it, I don't want to eat it. Miss K's class, you guys have some students up at the camera now, so I'll come to you. And then Linwood 7/8, I'll come to you live for your audio spot in a second too. But welcome in, guys.
Do we have proof that the megalodon is extinct?
Yes, I knew you were going to get it. Thank you.
Good question. Well, there are sort of bits and pieces of evidence that it might still be alive in the form of, say, bite marks on other animals or things like that. Things that could not possibly be from any other animal that we know of. But then again, these things often sort of turn out to be, there turns out to be a scientific reason behind it. And I highly doubt that there is an animal, a predator the size of a megalodon, alive today that's still able to sustain itself and remain hidden in the deep sea, because back when megalodon was alive, it wasn't a deep sea shark. It hunted in shallow waters, and that was how it was able to kind of sustain being not only large, because deep sea creatures can be large, but fast. It was an active predator rather than a scavenger. So for the megalodon to be alive today, it would have had to undergo quite a few sort of evolutionary changes to be suited to kind of remaining out of sight, and it would be sort of possibly a lot slower metabolism. Maybe its jaws would have evolved to kind of be better suited to eating what's down there rather than hunting fast, large, shallow water species. But yeah, I would love if it was alive today.
It would be so cool. I mean, I've got one of their teeth here. It's my favorite animal artifact I've ever owned. They're just such spectacular animals. They did go extinct, as best we understand, not that long ago. It's in the last few million years, I want to say. So that radical change to go from something that's a surface dweller to a deep sea dweller, I don't think there's a precedent for that in anything else. And I think I'm so glad you mentioned the fact that those are very different ecosystems. I think we tend to assume water, it's the same. You can be one place, you can be deeper. They're radically different environments. And so the adaptations that allow you to survive in one don't necessarily at all apply to deep sea. But I'm with you. I would love for it to be around. It's very cool. Some documentaries like to highlight, the nuance, but there's no scientist that we've ever heard of that legitimately thinks that they're still around, which is kind of too bad. We've got great white sharks, though, and sperm whales and giant amazing squid, so lots out there. Speaking of squid, I'm going to head to our Linwood class. If you guys 7/8 audio spot, Miss Blaney's group. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Can you show us a giant squid?
Yeah, can you show us a giant squid or what is the coolest squid you've ever seen? Are there other cool super squids out there? And do you have a picture of a giant squid to share by chance?
Not on my computer, but I could pull one up on Google, unless it's easier for you to pull
You know
one
what?
up.
I'll do it on my end, and you can tell us a little bit about it while I'm doing that.
Okay, so giant squids. Surprisingly, you've got two very, very, very large prominent squid species in the ocean, giant squid and colossal squid. And people often think that the colossal squid is larger. And while that's true in terms of sort of its width and the size of its mantle, in terms of length, the giant squid is bigger and potentially more of an active predator. While the colossal squid might be a filter feeder, but they're not too sure. They've only ever filmed them a few times and observed them a few times. So they're definitely a point of interest where a lot more research is needed. But as you can see here, they are enormous.
They are enormous. And it's so cool, by the way, when I grew up, there had never been footage like this. Like there was never a shot of a giant squid beside a boat. So all this is in the last few years, all things considered. And so the more we explore, the more we find things like this. And it's just such a special opportunity to learn about such a cool creature. Leo, I'm going to take some questions from YouTube. Miss Matsuba's class is killing it. Miss Wachenko's class too. So we'll take a few from there, and then we'll do another live round with all our classes. So our Wachenko class wants to know, are there carnivorous plants in the sea? Any plant that's eating things going by?
Well, interestingly enough, there are no plants in the sea, in the deep sea. There are, of course, in shallow waters, you get the plants, but below 200 meters, there are none. So that rules out any deep sea carnivorous plants. In terms of shallower waters, again, that's not sort of something that I'm particularly familiar with the intricacies of those ecosystems, but I certainly think that there is potential for that to be a niche that plants would definitely be able to occupy. You see it on land, in so many different ecosystems, and it's such a good feeding mechanism. But I wouldn't be too sure. There are, however, lots of plant-like animals, both in the shallows and the deep sea, that, of course, eat other animals. So you've got the corals and sponges, which can often be considered plant-like because they're sessile, meaning that they kind of have firm attachment points on rock. And many of those, particularly corals in the deep water, where they can't use photosynthesis to get their food, instead eat animals. They eat shrimps, small fish. They catch them with the stinging cells or nematocysts in the sort of little tentacles. Of course, them being closely related to jellyfish.
Yes, I love these animals that are so different from everything we think of or see on the surface. It's so spectacular to think that as we look for life maybe elsewhere in the universe, that there's so much diversity on Earth that whenever we depict this as like a 5'11" reptile-like person, on some other world, it's ridiculous because even on Earth we have things that as radically different as a sequoia from a jellyfish, a water bear from a person. I mean, these are incredibly different species, and it's so exciting to sort of witness that diversity, and especially in a place like the deep sea where things are so radically odd from anything that we're used to. Great question, guys. Miss Matsuba's class has two questions that are related. So Alex wants to know how deep the deepest part of the ocean is, and Lavinia wants to know, is there an ocean or sea that is the deepest? So you can answer both of those in one go.
Yes. So the deepest point of the ocean, as far as we know so far, is the Challenger Deep at the very bottom of the Mariana Trench, which I believe is between Guam and Palau in the Pacific. I could be wrong, and I think it's 11,000 meters. That could be feet. Jesse, if you're able to pull that up.
Yes, it's meters, and it's deeper than Mount Everest is tall. So I think it's about 33 or 34,000 feet. I can find the exact figure for that. But I'm going to bring it up as a banner in a minute too, so everyone can see the name. But it's a spectacular place, and we started going there in bigger numbers. Can you talk about that for just a second?
Well, yeah. there's I believe his name is Victor Vescovo. He became the first person to travel to the deepest point of every single ocean on the planet. And there is now a Triton submarine that takes, scientists and researchers to the bottom of Challenger Deep quite regularly, which, a few decades ago was kind of, it wasn't possible. Before then, only a handful of people had ever been to the deep sea floor. You had the Trieste mission with Don Walsh and Jack Pickard, and then you had, of course, James Cameron in his deep sea Challenger sub. It was a very sort of a long pill-shaped submersible, and even then, the technology was by no means perfect for that kind of mission. I believe the glass window on the Trieste sub, when it neared the bottom, it cracked. And they only had about 5 minutes down there before they had to ascend, and it took hours.
That's the most, let's put it this way for Halloween. That would not be a good end if it really completely cracked and came in. That would be a very, very quick end to everyone on board. But just incredible the fact that we went from 2 people in the 50s to 3 by 2012. And now many, many people have been to this incredible place. Still, I think, fewer than the number of astronauts that have been on the moon. So the deep sea is still incredibly unexplored. And it's so exciting that there's so much interest and investment going into that nowadays. One more question from YouTube, and then we'll do another round with the live classes. We are ripping through this, guys, which is great. Miss Hood's class in Hatboro, Pennsylvania. Brittany wants to know, which is the deepest? We just covered that. Miss Hood's class, if you guys want to share another one, please do. We'll take how do Greenland sharks eat, or what do they eat?
So they are primarily scavengers, but so of course they feed on dead whales and other kind of carcasses in the deep sea. They probably won't feed on marine snow just because it's so small and they won't be able to sustain themselves. They're not designed for filter feeding in the same way that other animals are. But they're also very opportunistic, so they can actively hunt if an opportunity arises. And in fact, their slow metabolisms mean that they're able to save up a large amount of energy that they can then use for small but rapid bursts of energy. So if they've got prey right in front of their mouths that's moving along slow enough that they could catch it, they sometimes lash out, grab it, and they have a meal. So they're very, very opportunistic, which of course you have to be to survive in an environment like this where food is so scarce and you never know when the next meal is going to be. But they do have sharks that are perfectly designed for kind of carving flesh from very tough, rubbery, blubbery whale carcasses.
So for our students, you're en route to becoming a marine biologist and an oceanographer exploring these ecosystems now in university. And I want to stress that if anyone has anything that they love as much as you love this topic, that you're set for life. I mean, it's very rare to find someone who's quite as passionate as you are. Leo, we're going to go back to our live classes, YouTube groups. You can share additional ones there, but Mr. Shattuck's class, come on in first and take us away.
What type of animals do the vampire squid eat?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, this is a very, very good question because, of course, their name would have you believe that they're bloodsuckers, vampire, that they'd kind of prey on other animals. But surprisingly, they are one of the animals that eats only marine snow. So just those small, tiny particles of marine snow, dead animals and poo falling from above. They have that long tentacle that you saw in one of the videos that they kind of extend, and it's a little bit sticky, and the particles will stick to it, and then it reels it in and feeds on those particles. So despite its appearance, in fact, despite the sort of spiny appearance of the underside of its tentacles, Jesse, if you're able to find a quick picture of the pineapple posture, it's all for show. And the name just kind of alludes to their color, that deep red, blood red color. But they are filter feeders essentially, in a way, in the sense that they are just feeding on particles. Particle feed, suspension feeder would be better.
What am I finding a picture of? Just the vampire squid again, or
pineapple posture vampire squid? It's this kind of defensive posture they adopt.
Oh, posture. Sorry. Okay,
yes.
I'll find this for us. I'll make sure we get this up after our next question. But how cool is that?
It's very cool.
Miss K's class, come on in if you guys have a question for us.
Why are most fish blind in the deep?
Great question.
Well, interestingly enough, most fish aren't blind in the deep sea, but of course it makes sense to kind of expect that they would be. There's no sunlight, so you kind of think, why would they need eyes? Would they maybe lose them? Because it costs a lot in terms of energy and metabolic rates to sustain such a complex organ. But in fact, their eyes are enhanced in the deep sea. They're often larger, incredibly light sensitive. So in the Twilight Zone, where you get small amounts of sort of gloomy sunlight bleeding through from the surface waters, those large eyes allow them to maximize how much of that light they take in. But even in the bathypelagic zone, the midnight zone, they have large eyes for one key reason, and that is bioluminescence. Animals down there often have cells in their bodies where they are able to host these chemical reactions that produce light in the form of bioluminescence, and they use it for communication, for feeding, for defense, for warning, for attracting partners, all sorts. They essentially, it's like the voice of the deep sea, and it's actually quite advantageous that it's so dark down there, because it enables this entire new world of communication that isn't possible in the surface waters during the day, when bioluminescence just wouldn't show up. So eyes are still essential for that key reason, bioluminescence.
So we've had Dr. Diva on many times, and I want to stress for our students, if you go to Disney Plus, Welcome to Earth with Will Smith, he goes down with her and they turn off the lights of the submersible and see all the bioluminescent things around them. And I mean, if there's a more magical experience to be had on this planet in nature, I don't know what it is. But she notes the fact that it was so weird when we first found the things that were bioluminescent in the deep sea. Oh, how odd is that? What an odd way of communicating. And because it's the biggest ecosystem on this planet, it's a real way of thinking about it, that there are more kinds or more space that's taken up with things that is their sole or most important way of communicating than there are things with auditory signals or smell and pheromones. Bioluminescence is one of the most common ways that creatures communicate on this planet, which is a really cool way of thinking about it. Pineapple posture, I found this.
Yes.
This is the biggest picture that I can get. I don't want to dive too into the site in case it's weird, but so odd to fold your tentacles around you and look so strained. What a freaky awesome
And
picture.
it's just for show, because those spines are soft. They are completely soft. It's just to deter predators to go, oh, you look at me, I'm spiky.
It's funny. We're going to take one from YouTube really quick, and then we'll head to our other two classes to wrap up in a second. Actually, really quick, from Justin. He just wants to know what your shirt says.
It says you axolotl questions, which, the camera's following me, but in this situation is quite fitting.
So axolotl is one of the weirdest salamander groups or creatures on this planet. They're very, very unique. If you've never seen an axolotl, and certainly at the top of Leo's shirt, you guys can look that up. Liam wants to know more about the blobfish. Yes, I'm so happy we got a blobfish question. You can't do a deep sea program with that one. Does it change shape, and how?
So yes, in the deep sea where blobfish live, and where their common name actually is blob sculpin, they look fairly ordinary. Jesse, again, sorry to ask for so many pictures, but if you search blob sculpin, they just sort of look like wide-faced, sort of blobby, not blobby, but kind of they've got a lot of little bumps, very bumpy skin. They don't look anything like that very famous image of a blobfish that had been hauled up to the surface. Of course, they do change shape when you take them out of the water at speed and without letting them pressurize, and that's when they actually melt, because their bodies are kind of specifically adapted to survive in a very high pressure environment. So bringing them to the surface, the sort of rigidity of their cells and everything, it just falls apart. But there you go. The second picture, in fact, most of those pictures, is the blob sculpin. It's the blobfish, but in its natural habitat.
I've never seen a picture of it in its natural habitat. That's fascinating. I don't know what I feel sorrier for, the blobfish that's brought up to the surface too quick, or the alligator that they sacrificed to the isopods. I mean, it was dead, but just the idea behind it. Let's head to St. Martin, and then we'll go to Linwood for an audio question to wrap up. St. Martin School, come on in, guys.
Okay, so you know that like weird squid that has those long thingies?
Yeah.
How old is it?
How old is it? How do we know?
The Magna Pina, do you mean the one with the sort of like marionette
Yeah.
ridged elbows?
Absolutely.
Well, the footage that I showed you, that wasn't the grainy footage, the second bit of footage, even though it looks huge, they think that one's a juvenile. So they think that one is only a few years old, and at the rate that squid are able to grow, potentially they grow to enormous sizes, possibly sizes that we haven't seen in their species yet. So there is potential to find even larger specimens in future.
So I want to harp on something, because a couple times in that broadcast, where people paying really close attention, you'd see two laser points on the creatures that they were assessing. So can you explain a little bit about what those are and how they're used to measure things in the deep sea?
So essentially those lasers are set a specific distance apart. I think it can be varied by sort of the mission or the cruise, but I think generally it's 30 centimeters. I could be wrong. And it just means that when they're looking back at this ROV footage that's filmed by these, robots that they've sent down there, they can get a sense of scale. Because if you imagine you've got footage of a midwater organism, you have no idea how big it is. You can't take the animal out with any, easily. So you need a sense of scale, and those lights do exactly that. And it's how a lot of measurements in the deep sea are conducted.
I like too that you mentioned that it's younger. So my favorite story of a younger creature that was discovered ever, they did find a great white shark. I want to say back in like 2011, and it died. It unfortunately got caught in a net, but it was 21 feet long and it was a juvenile. So it was going to end up bigger than the shark in Jaws, which is so rare. Great white sharks are usually 12 to 14 feet, but there was this one massive one that was going to surpass sort of the iconic image of a Titanic great white shark. Very, very cool. Miss Blaney's class, come on in audio for one last question, and then we'll wrap up by sharing some more resources and ways to keep the learning going. Hey, guys.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you show us a picture of a giant Goliath grouper?
A Goliath grouper. Yes, I can pull that up. And Leo, can you tell us a little about those if you happen to know? I don't know if they live in the deep sea, do they?
They're reef fish, but they're one of the largest reef fish that you get, which is quite surprising because often, you know, the conditions of reefs, you've got these sort of incredibly complex ecosystems, lots of corals and tiny hidey holes. It's advantageous to be small, but this is one of very few reef fish that has, you know, gone the opposite and decided to be big. And I'm not entirely sure why, or the sort of the evolutionary advantage of that, because again, I know more about the deep sea, but they are spectacular looking creatures.
They really are. I know we've got quite a few classes in Southern Ontario today, and so if you get the chance, Ripley's Aquarium in Toronto, who we have on for many broadcasts, has Goliath grouper. So if you want to check them out in person, they really are a spectacular creature. They got a beautiful enclosure there. Leo, this has been so much fun. I want to stress again, I've shared this a few times now, but if people want to check out your website, naturalworldfacts.com, or your YouTube channel, there is so much there to discover. We have barely scratched the surface of all the stories that you have told on the deep sea and many other ecosystems over the last few years. You're an exceptional public science communicator, and it's been such a thrill having you on today. Before we bring in all our classes to say a big thank you and farewell, is there a final message, something that you really want to stick with our audience today about the deep sea?
Oh, I guess it would just be that the deep sea, despite being so far out of sight, you know, it's far removed, you can't see it, you can rarely go there, is such an important ecosystem for our entire planet. To not get too scientifically complex with this explanation, it has a huge role in sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and mitigating or kind of offsetting climate change caused by, you know, humans in so many different ways. And if the deep sea is damaged or we don't protect it, then that entire system breaks down. And one of the best ways that you can get involved and kind of help us ensure the future of the deep sea, and as a consequence, the whole biosphere, if you're passionate at all about the oceans, definitely pursue that. Pursue a role in marine biology or deep sea ecology, because it is just an incredible space to be working in, and you will never be bored. And of course, it is just crucial.
I love the essence earlier on in the program where you said, well, you know, exploring space is fun, but why would you not want to explore the deep ocean instead? Because there's all the life, there's all this incredible stuff, and it's part of our home here on planet Earth. Leo, this was a spectacular talk. What we do to end every broadcast, I'm going to bring in all our teacher friends to say a big thank you and farewell. So Miss Kay, Mr. Shattuck, St. Martin, Linwood, you guys want to unmute your mic and join me for a thank you and farewell? All right,